The colours you need for the onion skin are a little terracotta or dark brown, well conditioned and formed into a rectangle. This is for the main part of the line in the onion skin. And a little orange. This helps to define the lines and needs to be a rectangle of the same size. Doesn't matter whether it's a long rectangle or a square. Put the two together and squeeze them well. Make sure there's no air bubbles between the two. Then you need caramel, a thicker piece. The same size rectangle but much thicker. You're the artist here because there's many different skin colours for onions. My mix is approximately 2 parts of ochre, 1 part of terracotta and a touch each of green and orange. I'm squeezing and lengthening. Then cut in half and put the two pieces together. It's important you don't put the two dark bits together. Squeeze it down, then cut it the other way and stack it again. This forms the basis of our skin mix. It contains 4 lines. You can stack it further, but I find this is the easiest way to handle it. Then I use a long blade to cut slices from this. Just tidying the edges up first. A bit more. So you have a nice flat edge to start off with. It's quite important to get nice, thin, even strips. 1, 2, 3, at least 4. You might prefer to use 5. It's always you who's the artist. But 4 or 5 strips should be sufficient. And put these together side by side. And stick them together really carefully. You might find this easier to do in your hands, or for you, your work surface might work best. As long as they're stuck, it doesn't matter. Line them up and stick them together. That's number 4. And a 5th for luck. There's only one problem. If you use too many lines, the lines themselves might not be obvious. So you won't want more than 5 strips. Squash these together really well and then lift them with a blade. That stops them parting again. But just to be on the safe side, I'm using my fingers to stick those lines really well together. And then rolling them. At home I use a pasta machine for this job. Lift, roll. Just make sure it doesn't stick to your surface. If you're going to roll it, you need to lift it regularly, as I'm doing. It needs to be really thin. Putting a skin on things makes things look really translucent and realistic, but that skin does have to be thin. So I'm just giving it an extra stretch here by hand. Making sure it's all properly joined. That should be about right. Just repair that little hole there. The trouble with making it thin is that you do get little holes. Now again, I want to mix a cylinder of translucent with a little green in it. Now this isn't important so much because you may or may not reveal any of it, but I always like to have a fairly translucent centre because it does give it that delicacy of colour that I'm known for. So just a little bit of green in there and mix it really well. This cylinder goes inside the skin, and you need to wrap the skin around very carefully because it's quite fragile at this stage. And again, you want to look to joining those colours up without an overlap. So look for that line and then cut down, and then you can just push together to join them up with your thumbs. Doesn't matter if the lines meet or whatever, they don't have to be straight. I'm just tearing this end bit off, it's extra. You can of course reuse these pieces in your next mix. Just mix them down again. And now it's time to lengthen. Again, I prefer to use my fingers to start off with. Leave the rolling till it's stretched a bit already. Now you can start to really lengthen it. Don't forget to leave it just a little bit too large for scale. And cut it down into pieces that you can handle. Now you close the end in exactly the same way as you did for the apple. Just tweaking the end and persuading it to join together. Pressing it down. In this case, the other end's closed by tweaking it into a point. You need not to twist this. You need to close it together straight rather than twisted. And it's only at the very end that you can give it a little twizzle. Now I'm threading some sewing thread through it. This thread's knotted at the end, so it won't go right through. It should just sit on the bottom, the knot. Push it in a bit. I'm using a light colour so you can see the knot on the end. You might want to use a darker colour for this. Then cut it off, leaving at least 7 or 8 centimetres. 10 centimetres is better. so that you can then tie, when they're cooked, tie them together in pairs. I'm just imagining these are cooked, although they're not, but this is when you tie them. And I do a knot like that with the two together, hook it through with my scissors or whatever I'm using, and then gently let it down until it meets the top of the two onions, and then trim it off. Remember, these should be cooked before you do this. And here are some more. You'll need at least 20 for a string. I'm using flower wire. This has to be paper covered to make the strings. Here I'm using white so you can clearly see what I'm doing, but normally I'd colour it a light fawn colour. This would disappear against my background if I did. So put 2 onions on and give it a little twizzle, and then put another pair and twizzle again. Can you see I've got my finger between the two? That helps me to twist it. 1, 2, 3. 1 for luck. 3 or 4 times it needs to be twisted between each pair. One of them's just broken. That sometimes happens if they're not tied together very well or the thread falls through the bottom. Don't worry about it, just add a few more. And carry on until you've got a string the length that you want it. As you can see, I like a long string of onions. When you feel you've got enough, continue twisting for a few centimetres. And then you can bend the wire at the top and twist it back around the main part, like so. Then you can cut this extra piece off with a pair of scissors that don't matter. And that's how it ends up. Then the last thing you have to do is just trim those knots if they're a bit ugly. Trim any end bits off. And you can try and splay the threads at the end of the knots. Try not to cut the whole knot off, otherwise your onion will just drop off. Just any extra bits.